My brother lied to CPS about our situation at home so my parents could keep hurting me, so I went nuclear and never looked back. 5 years later, he's calling me in tears claiming I'm the only family he has left. The betrayal still burns in my chest when I think about that day in the school counselor's office, how his perfect mask slipped into place the moment our parents walked in, his eyes cold and calculating beneath that concerned expression. My life changed forever on a Tuesday afternoon. Rain streamed down the windows of the counselor's office, creating distorted shadows across Ms. Peterson's face as she explained to my parents that I had reported physical abuse. My father's knuckles turned white as he gripped the armrests of his chair, that familiar vein pulsing in his temple. The warning sign I'd learned to fear since childhood. "Sarah is just acting out for attention," my mother said, her voice honey-sweet, completely at odds with the woman who'd held my head underwater in the bathtub just 2 nights before when I'd forgotten to clean the kitchen to her standards. "She's always been dramatic." She reached for my hand, and it took everything in me not to flinch away. The room felt smaller by the second, the walls closing in as my carefully planned escape crumbled before my eyes. Ms. Peterson looked between us, doubt creeping into her expression. I could see her resolve weakening as my father launched into his well-rehearsed speech about being strict but loving parents who only wanted the best for their troubled daughter. "We've tried everything," he said, his voice breaking at just the right moment. "Therapy, doctors, different approaches. Nothing seems to help with her behavior problems." I stared at the floor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. This was my one chance to escape, and it was slipping away. Then the door opened, and my brother Michael walked in. At 17, 2 years older than me, he'd always been the golden child, straight-A student, football star, parents' perfect son. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he would tell the truth. Ms. Peterson asked him directly, "Michael, have you ever witnessed your parents physically disciplining your sister in ways that seemed excessive or harmful?" I held my breath, my eyes locked on his face. For a split second, something flickered in his expression. Was it guilt? But then his features smoothed into that perfect mask again. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice steady and confident. "My parents are strict, but they've never hit us. Sarah's always making up stories for attention. She's been doing it since we were kids." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever endured. My own brother, the one person who knew exactly what happened behind closed doors, who had seen the bruises, heard my cries, sometimes even watched as punishment was administered. He was denying everything. Worse, he was painting me as a liar, as mentally unstable. I felt something break inside me in that moment, a clean snap like a bone giving way under too much pressure. Mrs. Peterson's doubt solidified into certainty, not about my parents' abuse, but about my supposed lies. The family united against me presented an impenetrable front. I watched my chance at freedom dissolve like salt in water, leaving nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal on my tongue. That night was the worst. My father waited until after dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the house was quiet. "You tried to destroy this family," he said, his voice eerily calm as he removed his belt. I won't describe what followed, but I'll never forget Michael standing in the doorway, watching with that blank expression, doing nothing as my punishment was administered for nearly an hour. Later, as I lay on my bed unable to sleep from the pain, my door creaked open. Michael slipped in and sat on the edge of my mattress. "You shouldn't have said anything," he whispered. "You know they'll never believe you over us. They see what they want to see." "Why?" I managed to ask through swollen lips. "You know what they do. You know it's wrong." He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "It's easier this way," he finally said. "If I side with them, they leave me alone. Don't you get it? I can't help you. I can only help myself." The coldness of his logic stunned me. My own brother had made a calculated decision to throw me to the wolves to save his own skin. The family secret would remain intact, preserved by his lies and my parents' performance. No one would ever believe me now. That night, I made a decision of my own. If no one would help me escape, I would have to save myself. I would play the game, pretend to be repentant, the troubled daughter who had learned her lesson. I would bide my time, gathering evidence, planning my escape with more care, and most importantly, I would never, ever trust my brother again. The next few months were a careful dance of compliance and secret rebellion. I became the model daughter on the surface. Grades improved, chores completed without complaint, the perfect mask of submission. My parents gradually relaxed their vigilance, believing they had successfully crushed my spirit. Michael watched me with suspicious eyes, clearly not trusting my transformation, but he said nothing. Meanwhile, I documented everything. I kept a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my closet, recording dates, times, incidents, injuries. I took photos of bruises with a disposable camera I'd bought with lunch money I'd saved. I recorded conversations on a small tape recorder I'd stolen from my father's office. Piece by piece, I built my case in secret. The opportunity came 6 months later when my school announced a weekend leadership retreat. My parents, eager to maintain their image as supportive parents of a reformed, troubled teen, agreed to let me go. They had no idea I had no intention of ever returning home. The trauma of that betrayal shaped every decision I made afterward. I reported my parents to CPS from the retreat, but this time I had evidence: photos, recordings, my detailed journal. The investigation that followed was thorough and devastating for my family. My parents were charged with child abuse. Michael, over 18 by then, escaped legal consequences but not the social fallout. The Golden Boy's reputation shattered when the truth came to light. I chose to live with my aunt in another state rather than enter the foster system. The physical distance helped, but the emotional wounds festered. I cut all contact with my brother, ignoring his increasingly desperate attempts to reach out as our parents' case progressed through the courts. His betrayal had cost me years of suffering that could have ended that day in the counselor's office if he'd just told the truth. Justice came slowly but definitively. My parents took a plea deal to avoid a public trial, receiving probation and mandatory counseling. The family we'd presented to the world, perfect, loving, normal, was exposed as a facade hiding years of abuse and secrets. Michael, suddenly without the foundation of family status he'd built his identity upon, floundered in the aftermath. For 5 years, I maintained my silence toward him. I finished high school living with my aunt, attended college on a scholarship, and began building a life defined by my choices rather than my trauma. I learned to trust again, made real friends, even started dating. The nightmares became less frequent, the flinching at sudden movements less noticeable. I was healing one day at a time without any of them in my life. Then yesterday, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sarah? Michael's voice was ragged, barely recognizable. I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. But I need to talk to you. Please. I should have hung up. Instead, I found myself asking, why now? After 5 years? His answer stopped me cold. Because you're the only family I have left, and I need to tell you the truth about everything. I sat in my car outside the diner for 20 minutes, debating whether to go inside or drive away. Through the window, I could see Michael hunched over a coffee cup, his shoulders tense. He looked nothing like the golden boy I remembered. His face was gaunt, his once athletic frame diminished. Part of me felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction at his obvious decline, but another part, a part I wasn't comfortable acknowledging, felt a pang of something like pity. The bell above the door jangled as I entered. Michael's head snapped up, his eyes widening with recognition, then relief. I slid into the booth across from him, maintaining as much distance as possible. Up close, he looked even worse. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, a tremor in his hands as he clutched his mug. I didn't think you'd come, he said, his voice hoarse. I almost didn't. I kept my tone neutral, fighting the urge to either scream at him or flee. You said you wanted to tell me the truth, so talk. He took a shaky breath. Dad's dead. The words hit me like a physical blow. For years I'd imagined this moment, how I might feel hearing my abuser was gone. I'd expected relief, perhaps even joy. Instead, I felt nothing. A hollow emptiness where emotion should be. Heart attack, Michael D. when I didn't respond. 3 weeks ago, Mom's in the psychiatric ward. She had a breakdown at the funeral. I took a sip of water, using the moment to compose myself. That doesn't explain why you're contacting me now. I'm selling the house, he said. Going through their things, I found evidence. Things they kept. His voice cracked. Things that prove everything you said was true. My heart pounded so hard I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. What kind of evidence? Michael reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. My father's distinctive handwriting covered the pages. Dad kept records, detailed accounts of every discipline session, dates, reasons, methods. It's all here, Sarah. Everything. The betrayal felt fresh again, ripping open wounds I thought had scarred over. You knew, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You always knew. You didn't need his journal to prove anything. I know. His eyes couldn't meet mine. But it's worse than even you thought. There are things in here about both of us, from when we were very young. Things I'd convinced myself never happened. So now you want what? Forgiveness? Absolution? Because Dad's dead and you found his sick journal? No. Michael finally looked up, his eyes hollow. I want to tell you what really happened. All of it. Why I did what I did. You deserve to know the truth, even if you never speak to me again afterward. I should have walked out. 5 years of building a new life, of therapy sessions working through the trauma, of learning to trust again, all of it could be undone by whatever he was about to say. But something kept me rooted to that vinyl booth seat. Maybe it was simple curiosity, maybe it was the need for closure, or maybe, despite everything, some small part of me still needed to understand why my own brother had betrayed me. I'm listening, I said, steeling myself for whatever came next. Michael rubbed his hands over his face, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that I felt a chill. It started when I was 7. Dad would take me to his study, tell me it was man time. He'd show me his collection of disciplinary implements, belts, switches, rulers. He called it training. Said someday I'd have a family of my own to keep in line. My stomach twisted. This wasn't what I'd expected. When you were born, he was disappointed you weren't another boy. Called you just a girl for years. Michael's voice had taken on a distant quality as if he were reading from a script. When you were about 3, he started making me watch your punishments. Said I needed to learn how to handle a disobedient female. His voice cracked. If I showed any emotion, any sympathy for you, I got it twice as bad later. I remembered those early punishments. How Michael would stand in the doorway, face blank, eyes empty. I'd interpreted it as indifference, even enjoyment. I'd never considered it might be terror. By the time I was 13, he was making me participate, hold you down sometimes. Once he made me administer the belt. Remember that? I did. It was the only time Michael had ever cried while hurting me. He'd been clumsy, the belt landing in unpredictable places. My father had berated him for his weakness. When I refused the next time, he locked me in the basement storage room for 2 days. No food, no light, just darkness and the spiders. Michael shuddered. After that, I learned to be the perfect son. The golden boy. I figured out that as long as I excelled, grades, sports, being the son he wanted, I could minimize both of our punishments. So you decided to save yourself at my expense, I said, the old anger bubbling up. No. Michael looked pained. I thought I was protecting both of us the only way I knew how. When you went to the counselor that day, I panicked. I knew what would happen if they didn't believe you, and I knew they wouldn't. Not against all 3 of us. You could have told the truth, I insisted. You could have backed me up. You don't understand. The night before, Dad had taken me aside, told me exactly what would happen if I didn't handle the situation. Michael's hand unconsciously went to his ribs. He made it very clear what the consequences would be. I wanted to maintain my anger, to hold on to the righteous indignation that had sustained me for 5 years, but the picture Michael was painting complicated the simple narrative I'd constructed. Brave sister betrayed by cowardly brother. The truth, as always, was messier. After you left, Michael D., things got worse. Without you there as the primary target, Mom and Dad focused everything on me. Dad drank more. Mom's medications made her erratic. I was counting the days until college, planning my own escape. Did you ever try to contact CPS yourself? I asked. Something dark passed over his face. Once, a teacher noticed bruising during gym class my senior year. Asked questions. I finally broke down and told her everything. She reported it. What happened? Dad found out. Convinced everyone I was having a mental health crisis due to the stress of college applications. Said the bruises were from football. I had my coach and teammates back him up. Michael's voice was hollow. The investigation was closed in less than a week. After that, I gave up. Just tried to survive until I could leave. The waitress approached, refilling our coffees. We sat in silence until she moved away. Why are you telling me all this now? I finally asked. Because after Dad died, I found more than just his journal. I found letters, dozens of them, all addressed to you, none of them sent. He pulled an envelope from his bag and slid it across the table. This one's mine. I wrote it 3 years ago, after I moved out. I never had the courage to send it. I stared at the envelope, my name written in Michael's familiar handwriting. Part of me wanted to rip it up without reading it. Another part needed to know what it said. Read it, he urged. Please. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, unfolded the pages. The letter was dated October 15th, 2018. Dear Sarah, it began. I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about you. Wonder if you're safe, if you're happy, if you found people who treat you with the love and respect you always deserved but never received from us. The letter D for pages. A confession, an apology, an explanation of his own abuse, and finally a plea not for forgiveness but for understanding. As I read, hot tears splashed onto the paper, blurring the ink. You were the brave one, the letter concluded. You did what I never could. You escaped. You told the truth. In saving yourself, you showed me a path I might someday find the courage to take. I don't deserve a place in your new life, but I want you to know that my door will always be open if you ever need anything. Your brother, Michael. I folded the letter carefully, trying to process the conflicting emotions churning inside me. The revelation of Michael's own victimhood didn't erase his betrayal, but it contextualized in ways that complicated my neat categories of victim and perpetrator, brave and cowardly, right and wrong. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Michael said quietly. I just thought you deserved to know the whole truth. I studied his face, seeing echoes of the boy he'd been, of the trauma we'd shared. What do you want from me, Michael? Really? He seemed surprised by the question. Nothing. I don't expect anything. He hesitated. I'm trying to figure out who I am without them, without the fear and the lies. I thought maybe you could understand that better than anyone. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 5 years, I'd defined myself in opposition to my family, especially Michael. My identity had been built around being the one who escaped, the truth teller, the survivor who'd been betrayed. What would it mean to reconsider that narrative? I need time, I said finally. This is a lot to process. Michael nodded, looking relieved just to have been heard. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As I drove home that night, my mind raced with new information, new perspectives. The simple narrative of betrayal had been complicated by the revelation of shared trauma. The brother I'd hated for 5 years was also a victim of the same abuse, navigating his own path to survival the only way he knew how. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But for the first time in years, I was willing to listen. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward a different kind of healing. Not just from the trauma of my childhood, but from the betrayal that had defined my early adulthood. The next morning, I woke to a text from Michael. No pressure, just wanted to say thank you for listening. It meant more than you know. I stared at the message for a long time before typing a response that would change everything. There's a support group that meets Thursdays at the community center for adult survivors of family trauma. If you're interested, I could send you the information. His reply came seconds later. I'd like that. Thank you. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement that healing might be possible. Not just for me, but perhaps for both of us. And for now, that was enough. I didn't hear from Michael for 2 weeks after our meeting at the diner. I'd sent him the information about the support group as promised, but he hadn't confirmed whether he'd attend. Part of me was relieved. I needed space to process everything he'd told me, to reconsider the narrative I'd built over 5 years. Another part worried he'd disappeared again, taking with him answers to questions I hadn't even formulated yet. My therapist, Dr. Levine, helped me work through the confusion during our weekly sessions. You're experiencing cognitive dissonance, she explained during one particularly difficult session. For years, you've understood your trauma through a specific lens. Michael as willing betrayer, you as the abandoned victim. His revelations challenge that framework. Doesn't it bother you? I asked, twisting a tissue between my fingers until it shredded. That I might sympathize with him after what he did? Dr. Levine's smile was gentle. Trauma isn't a competition, Sarah. Understanding his pain doesn't invalidate yours, nor does it erase his responsibility for his actions. Both things can be true simultaneously. This concept, that Michael could be both victim and perpetrator, that I could both understand his choices and hold him accountable for them, was difficult to reconcile. My mind kept wanting to sort people into neat categories, good or bad, trustworthy or dangerous, victim or abuser. The messy reality was harder to accept. 3 weeks after our meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. I went to the group yesterday. It was intense, but helpful. Thank you. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. After several drafts, I settled on simple honesty. I'm glad it helped. How are you doing with everything else? His response came quickly. Selling the house next week. Found more of Dad's journals, some photos too. Evidence of things I didn't even remember. It's been rough. I hesitated, then wrote, Do you want to talk about it? Yes, but not over text. Maybe coffee sometime? The question hung there, an invitation to step further into this tentative reconnection. Part of me wanted to retreat back to the safety of distance, of righteous anger. But another part, growing stronger each day, was curious. Not just about what he'd found, but about who he was becoming in the aftermath of our shared trauma. Saturday at 2? Same place? I suggested. I'll be there. Thank you, Sarah. The diner was busier this time, weekend crowds filling the booths with families and couples. Michael was already there when I arrived, looking marginally better than he had weeks before. The hollow look in his eyes remained, but some color had returned to his face. Thanks for coming, he said as I slid into the booth. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted. After ordering coffee, an awkward silence settled between us. We were no longer children sharing a home, no longer bound by the unspoken rules of our dysfunctional family, but we weren't quite strangers either. We existed in some undefined middle ground, connected by blood and shared trauma, but separated by years of silence and unresolved betrayal. I want to show you something, Michael finally said, breaking the silence. He pulled a manila envelope from his bag and hesitated. But I need to warn you, it's disturbing. My stomach tightened. What is it? Photos Dad kept, documentation of punishment sessions. He looked physically ill. I found them in a locked box in his study. Some are of me, but most... He couldn't finish. Most are of me, I concluded, my voice surprisingly steady. He nodded. You don't have to look. I just thought you should know they exist. If you ever needed proof, for any reason. I want to see, I interrupted, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Michael hesitated, then slid the envelope across the table. I'll understand if you need to leave after. The photos were even worse than I'd imagined. Clinical almost, in their documentation of methodical abuse. Each was dated, some with notes on the infraction being punished. My father's handwriting, neat and precise, cataloging human suffering like a scientist recording experimental results. What struck me most was seeing myself through his lens, a small, terrified child with eyes too old for her face. In some photos, Michael appeared in the background, his expression a mask of careful neutrality. In others, he was photographed separately, his own punishments documented with the same meticulous attention to detail. One photo in particular stopped my breath. Michael at about 14, belt in hand, tears streaming down his face as he stood over me. On the back, my father had written, "Michael's first administration of discipline, needs improvement in technique and emotional control." I looked up from the photos to find Michael watching me, his face a study in shame and apprehension. "He was grooming you," I said quietly. "To the cycle." Michael nodded, unable to speak. "Did you keep these to punish yourself?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Carrying around physical evidence of the worst moments of our lives?" He seemed startled by the question. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I thought you deserved to decide what happens to them. I considered this as I carefully returned the photos to the envelope. "Have you shown these to anyone else? The police, maybe?" "No. The statute of limitations for child abuse has passed in our state. Dad's dead. Mom's in psychiatric care. There's no one left to prosecute." He hesitated. "But I thought they might help you, somehow, to know you weren't crazy. That it really was as bad as you remembered." The validation hit me harder than I expected. For years after my escape, I'd sometimes doubted my own memories. Had it really been that bad? Had I exaggerated the abuse in my mind? The photos confirmed what I'd always known but sometimes questioned, the reality of my childhood trauma. "Thank you," I said finally, "for showing me these, for keeping them." Relief flooded his features. "You're not angry?" "I'm angry about a lot of things, Michael, but not about this." I pushed the envelope back toward him. "What will you do with them?" "Whatever you want. Burn them. Keep them. It's your decision." The trust implicit in that statement, allowing me to decide the fate of evidence that implicated him as well as our parents, felt significant. A small step toward something I wasn't quite ready to name. Burn them, I decided. Not to protect anyone, but because we don't need them anymore. We know what happened. We lived it. Michael nodded, tucking the envelope away. "There's something else. Something I found when clearing out Mom's things from the psychiatric facility." He pulled out a smaller envelope. "Letters she wrote to you but never sent, dating back to when you first left." My hand trembled as I took the envelope. "Have you read them?" "No, they're addressed to you." Unlike the photos, I couldn't bring myself to open these letters in the diner. The thought of reading my mother's words, of potentially being manipulated or gaslighted even now, was too much. "I'll read these later," I said, tucking them into my purse. Michael seemed to understand. "There's one more thing I wanted to tell you. I've started therapy. Real therapy, not the family counseling dog and pony show Dad orchestrated after you left." "That's good," I said cautiously. "How is it?" "Brutal," he admitted with a mirthless laugh. "But necessary. My therapist thinks I have PTSD. Says I've been operating in survival mode for so long I don't know how to function normally." I recognize the diagnosis all too well. "Join the club." "Yeah, I figured." He hesitated. "She also helped me understand something I've been struggling with. Why I couldn't stand up for you that day in the counselor's office." His voice dropped. "I was terrified. Not just of Dad's punishment, but of being homeless, helpless. He'd made it clear that if I ever betrayed the family, I'd lose everything. Home, college fund, future. At 17, that seemed like a death sentence. But I faced exactly that," I pointed out, "and survived." "You were always stronger than me," Michael said simply. "Braver. You did what I couldn't, stand up to them, escape on your own terms. I needed a safety net. You just jumped." The admission surprised me. For years, I'd seen Michael as the privileged one, the golden boy who had our parents' approval and protection. I'd never considered that his position might have been its own kind of trap, gilded, but no less confining. "We made different choices," I said carefully, "based on different circumstances." "My choices hurt you," he said, voice breaking. That's something I have to live with. I couldn't argue with that truth. His betrayal had extended my suffering by months, maybe years. Nothing could change that fact. But sitting across from him now, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. What happens now? I asked. With the house, with Mom, with everything? Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so achingly familiar it transported me back to childhood for a moment. The house sells next week. I'm using part of the money to pay for Mom's daycare. The rest, I don't know. It feels tainted somehow. An idea formed, tentative but growing stronger. You could donate it to organizations that help abused children, turn something poisonous into something healing. His eyes lit up. That's perfect, actually. Would you help me choose which organizations? You'd know better than I would which ones actually make a difference. The request surprised me. It was the first time he'd asked for my input, my expertise, acknowledging that my experience, even my trauma, had given me wisdom he lacked. I'll think about it, I said, not ready to commit, but not refusing either. As we prepared to leave, Michael hesitated. The support group you told me about, would it be okay if I kept attending? I don't want to make you uncomfortable if you go too. I haven't been in months, I admitted. But it's a good group. You should keep going if it helps. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. Thank you for everything today, for listening, for not hating me, even though you have every right to. I couldn't tell him I didn't hate him. The truth was more complicated than that. But as we parted ways outside the diner, I realized the white-hot rage that had fueled me for years had cooled into something more complex, more nuanced. Not forgiveness? Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of a different kind of understanding. That night, I finally opened my mother's letters. Unlike my father's methodical documentation or Michael's raw confession, my mother's words were a jumble of contradictions. Pleas for forgiveness followed by accusations of betrayal, admissions of failure followed by attempts to shift blame. Reading between the lines, I saw a woman trapped in her own cycle of denial and enablement, too weak or too damaged to protect her children from abuse. The letters revealed nothing I didn't already know, offered no new insights or genuine contrition. But they confirmed something important. I had made the right choice in leaving. Nothing in those pages suggested my mother would have ever become the parent I needed. I texted Michael the next morning. Read Mom's letters. Nothing surprising. How are you doing? His response came quickly. Better for having talked to you. The house closes tomorrow. Still thinking about those organizations if you have suggestions. I hesitated, then typed, there's a children's advocacy center that helped me after I left. Could start there. I can send you their information. That would be great. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. As I sent him the details, I realized something surprising. For the first time in 5 years, I was communicating with my brother not as a victim to her betrayer, but as one survivor to another. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly complicated. There were conversations we still needed to have, boundaries to establish, trust to rebuild slowly, if at all. But in acknowledging our shared trauma without erasing his responsibility for his choices, I'd found an unexpected path forward. Not to the past, but to something new. Something defined not by what had been done to us or by us, but by what we might choose to do next. The following week, I received an email notification that a substantial donation had been made to the Children's Advocacy Center in my name. Attached was a message from Michael. First step in trying to turn poison into medicine. Thank you for showing me how. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a reply that felt both terrifying and necessary. Would you like to meet for coffee again next Saturday? There's more I'd like to talk about. His response was immediate. I'll be there. Same time, same place. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a step towards something I hadn't thought possible just months before. A future where the betrayal that had defined us didn't have to be the end of our story. The bell above the diner door jangled as I entered. Scanning the Saturday afternoon crowd until I spotted Michael in our usual booth. He looked up, a tentative smile crossing his face as I approached. 3 coffee meetings over 2 months had established a fragile routine between us. Not quite friendship, definitely not the easy sibling relationship we'd never had, but something intentional. Something we were both choosing, week by week. "I ordered you coffee," he said as I slid into the booth. "Hope that's okay." "Thanks." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, gathering my thoughts. Today's conversation would be different from our previous meetings. Today, I had questions that needed answers. Michael seemed to sense the shift. "Everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "About that day in the counselor's office." His body tensed visibly, but he nodded. "Anything." "You said Dad threatened you the night before. Made it clear what would happen if you didn't handle the situation." I met his eyes directly. "What exactly did he say to you?" Michael's gaze dropped to his coffee. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. "I need to know," I pressed. "All of it." He took a deep breath. "He took me to the basement while you were doing homework. Said he knew you were planning something, that you'd been talking to the school counselor." His voice became almost mechanical, distancing himself from the memory. "He said if I didn't convince everyone you were lying, he'd make sure I never made it to college, that he'd break my legs so badly I'd never play football again, that he'd tell everyone I was the one who hurt you." My stomach clenched. "He was going to blame it all on you?" Michael nodded. "He had it all planned out. Said he'd tell people I had anger issues, that he and Mom had been trying to get me help. He even had falsified therapy records showing I'd been in treatment for violent tendencies." "That's why you seemed so practiced with your statement," I realized. "He coached you." "Word for word." Michael's hands trembled slightly around his mug. "He made me rehearse it for hours that night. Said if I deviated at all, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." He finally looked up, his eyes haunted. "I was a coward, Sarah. I knew what he was doing to you was wrong. Knew you deserved better. But I was too scared to stand up to him." The admission hung between us. For years, I'd imagined Michael's betrayal as calculated selfishness, the golden boy protecting his perfect life at my expense. The reality was both simpler and more complex. A terrified teenager making impossible choices under threat, just as I had been. "Did you ever consider telling the truth anyway?" I asked. "Despite his threats?" Pain flashed across his face. "Once, when Ms. Peterson asked me directly if I'd seen any abuse. For a second, I almost said yes." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But then I looked at Dad, and he was doing that thing with his watch, turning the face inward, like he always did before a punishment. And I couldn't do it. I froze." I remembered that gesture, my father slowly rotating his watch face inward, a silent signal that consequences would follow. The Pavlovian fear response it triggered was something only another victim of his abuse could understand. "After you left, Michael D., I told myself I'd done what was necessary, that at least one of us was safe at home, that you'd have ended up in some terrible foster situation." He laughed bitterly. "I was so good at rationalizing, at believing my own lies." "When did you stop believing them?" I asked. "When I saw what they did to you that night." His voice cracked, standing in that doorway, watching him use the belt for almost an hour, hearing your cries get weaker and weaker. Something broke in me. I knew then that I'd made the wrong choice, that I'd sacrificed you to save myself. He wiped roughly at his eyes. "I've never forgiven myself for that. Never will." The rawness of his confession hit me hard. For 5 years, I'd nurtured my anger, letting it fuel my recovery, my independence. I'd needed that anger to survive, to justify cutting all ties with my family. But sitting across from my brother now, seeing the genuine remorse etched into his features, I felt something unexpected. The first tendrils of compassion taking root, where only resentment had grown before. "I understand why you did it," I said finally. "I don't know if I can ever forget it, but I understand." Relief washed over his face. "I never expected that much." "It doesn't erase what happened," I clarified. or make it okay. I know. He hesitated. Can I ask you something now? I nodded cautiously. How did you find the courage to leave? To start over completely on your own? I've been wondering that for years. The question surprised me. No one had ever asked how I'd managed my escape, only why I'd torn the family apart by reporting the abuse. I realized no one was coming to save me, I said simply. Not you, not the school, not CPS. If I wanted out, I had to save myself. I stirred my coffee, watching the liquid swirl. I spent 6 months planning, documenting everything, saving lunch money, researching how to file for emancipation. I learned from my first attempt with the counselor. I needed irrefutable evidence. That's why Dad started searching your room more frequently, Michael realized. He suspected you were gathering evidence. Probably. But I got smarter after that first failure. Kept everything at school, in a locker only I had access to. Started recording conversations on a device I hid in my backpack. The memories of those desperate months came flooding back. The constant fear of discovery, the painstaking documentation, the calculated performance of compliance. When did you decide to contact Aunt Julia? He asked. I tensed. How did you know about that? Dad found out somehow. After you left, he was livid that his own sister had conspired against him. Cut her off completely. I hadn't known that detail. Aunt Julia had never mentioned any fallout with her brother, had simply welcomed me into her home without question when I finally reached out. I found her number in Mom's address book, I explained. Called her from a payphone during that leadership retreat. Told her everything. She believed me immediately. Said she'd always suspected something wasn't right. The memory of that phone call, the first time an adult had simply believed me without question, still brought a lump to my throat. She agreed to take me in if I could get legally removed from the home. That's why you went to CPS from the retreat instead of coming home, Michael said, the pieces finally clicking into place. You had an exit strategy. I nodded. I showed them all my evidence at once, the photos, the recordings, my journal. They moved immediately to get me placed with Aunt Julia through emergency kinship care. Michael was quiet for a long moment. You were 17 years old, planning and executing an escape most adults couldn't manage. Meanwhile, I was 20, still living at home, still playing by his rules. Admiration mixed with shame in his voice. You really were the strong one. Not strong, I corrected. Desperate. There's a difference. Still, you saved yourself? I couldn't even do that until Dad died. The waitress arrived with more coffee, giving me a moment to consider his words. Had I saved myself out of strength as he suggested or out of desperation? Perhaps the distinction didn't matter. The outcome was the same. Freedom, hard-won, and fiercely protected. What happens now? Michael asked after the waitress left. With us, I mean. It was the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. The reason I'd requested this meeting. What did I want from this tentative reconnection? What was even possible given our history? I don't know, I admitted. I'm still processing everything you've told me, still figuring out how I feel about it all. That's fair. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. For what it's worth, I'm grateful for even this much. The chance to explain, to apologize, I never expected that. Can I ask you something else? I said suddenly. Something I've wondered for years. Of course. Was it worth it? Staying with them, keeping their secret? Did it give you what you hoped for? Michael's face darkened. No. After you left, Dad drank more. Mom retreated into prescription medications. The abuse got worse, just focused entirely on me now. By the time I finally moved out at 22, I was a shell of a person. He stared into his coffee. I tried college but dropped out after 2 semesters. Couldn't concentrate, couldn't connect with anyone. Started drinking like Dad, taking pills like Mom. It took years to admit I needed help. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. That must have been incredibly difficult. Don't apologize, he said firmly. None of that was your fault. You did what you had to do to survive. I made my choices, and I've had to live with them. His accountability surprised me. I'd expected excuses, perhaps even subtle attempts to make me feel guilty for abandoning him. Instead, he was taking full responsibility for his decisions and their consequences. "What about you?" he asked. "After you got out, are you okay?" The question was so simple, so human, it caught me off guard. When was the last time anyone from my family had asked if I was okay and genuinely wanted to know the answer? It was hard at first, I admitted. Nightmares, panic attacks, trust issues. I'd flinch when teachers raised their hands in class, couldn't stand being in small rooms with the door closed. The memories of those early months with Aunt Julia, jumping at loud noises, checking locks obsessively, struggling to believe this new safety was real, were still vivid. But Aunt Julia got me into therapy right away. That helped a lot. "And now?" he asked softly. "Now I'm okay, I think. I graduated college last year. I have a job I like, friends I trust. Therapy still, twice a month." I hesitated. "The trauma doesn't go away completely, but it doesn't control my life anymore." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm just starting that journey. Learning to function without fear as the primary motivator. It's disorienting." "It gets easier," I offered. "Not perfect, but easier." A comfortable silence settled between us. For the first time in our adult lives, we were having an honest conversation. No secrets, no performances, no fear hanging over our heads. Just two survivors of the same trauma, trying to understand each other across the divide of different choices and their consequences. "I have a proposal," I said finally. "Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe a new beginning." Hope flickered in Michael's eyes. "What kind of new beginning?" "I'm willing to keep meeting like this, once a month maybe. To talk, to get to know each other as the people we are now, not who we were forced to be then." I held up a hand as his face brightened. "But I need boundaries, clear ones." "Anything," he said quickly. "Just name them." "First, complete honesty. No more secrets, no more strategic omissions. If I ask a question, I need the full truth, even if it's ugly." He nodded solemnly. "Absolutely." "Second, I need you to respect that there are parts of my life I'm not ready to share. My friends, my work, where I live, those details stay private for now." "Of course, that's completely fair." "And third, ID, no pressure for reconciliation on any specific timeline. This process happens at my pace, not yours. If I need space, you give it to me without question." "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "Your terms, your timeline. I'm just grateful for any chance to be in your life again." I studied his face, looking for signs of the practiced performance he'd perfected in our childhood home. The agreeable son, saying whatever was necessary to keep the peace. But I saw only sincerity in his eyes, an openness that had never been safe to display in our parents' house. "There's something else," I said, reaching into my bag. "I've been thinking about those photos you showed me, about turning poison into medicine, as you put it." I placed a business card on the table between us. The logo for a local community center was printed on the front, along with a name, Youth Trauma Recovery Program. "They're looking for volunteers to speak to groups of teachers, counselors, social workers, people who might be the first to recognize signs of abuse in children." My voice steadied as I did. "I've done it a few times, telling my story, helping them understand what to look for, how to respond effectively. It's healing, somehow. Turning the worst experiences of my life into something that might help other kids." Michael picked up the card, turning it over in his hands. "You think I should volunteer too?" "I think your perspective is valuable," I said carefully. "As someone who was both a victim and, in certain moments, an enabler of abuse, you understand both sides in a way most people don't." He looked stunned by the suggestion. "You think anyone would want to hear from me, after what I did?" The reality of abuse is complicated. Family dynamics are complicated. Your story, the coercion, the impossible choices, the long-term effects of complicity under duress, that's something these professionals need to understand. I met his eyes. "It might help you heal too." Michael stared at the card for a long moment. "I'd need to think about it, talk to my therapist, make sure I'm ready to be that vulnerable." "Take all the time you need," I said. The offer stands whenever you're ready. As we prepared to leave, Michael hesitated by the door. Sarah, thank you. Not just for today, but for showing me what courage looks like, what healing looks like. I hope someday I can make you proud to call me your brother again. The statement hung between us, heavy with emotion and possibility. 5 years ago, I would have laughed bitterly at the idea of ever feeling anything positive about my brother again. Now I wasn't so sure. The future felt suddenly wider, full of potential paths I hadn't previously considered. One step at a time, I said, not making promises I wasn't sure I could keep. See you next month? He nodded, a genuine smile lighting his face. I'll be here. As I drove home, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The brother I'd written off as a willing betrayer had revealed himself to be something more complex, a fellow victim who'd made different choices under impossible circumstances. The anger that had fueled me for years was still there, but beside it now grew something new: compassion, understanding, even the tentative seedlings of connection. Dr. Levine had told me once that healing wasn't linear, that progress came in spirals, sometimes bringing us back to old pain before moving forward again. This felt like a spiral moment, circling back to the traumatic betrayal that had shaped my young adulthood, but seeing it from a new vantage point, with greater clarity and context. I wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, but for the first time, I could imagine a future where forgiveness might be possible. Not because Michael deserved it, necessarily, but because I deserved to be free of the weight of resentment I'd carried for so long. When I arrived home, I texted Aunt Julia. Had another meeting with Michael today. It went well. Think we might be finding a new way forward. Her response came quickly. Proud of you, sweetheart. Whatever you decide about your relationship with him, know that healing is never a straight line. Trust your instincts. I smiled at her message, grateful once again for the woman who had offered me sanctuary when I needed it most. She had shown me what healthy family love looked like, supportive without being controlling, present without being intrusive. Because of her, I knew what was possible, what I deserved. Later that evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Been thinking about what you said. Called the community center. I'm meeting with the program director next week to discuss volunteering. Thank you for believing I might have something worthwhile to contribute. I typed back, one step at a time. Let me know how it goes. As I set my phone aside, I realized something surprising. For the first time in 5 years, I was thinking of my brother not primarily as the person who had betrayed me, but as someone on his own journey of healing and redemption. The betrayal would always be part of our shared history, a wound that had changed the course of both our lives. But perhaps it didn't have to be the only defining feature of our relationship going forward. The trauma we had survived had shaped us both, but it didn't have to determine our future. That, I was beginning to understand, was something we could choose for ourselves. One conversation, one boundary, one act of courage at a time. 6 months after Michael's first phone call, I stood nervously outside a conference room at the community center, watching through the small window as social workers, school counselors, and teachers settled into their seats. Inside, Michael was arranging his notes at the podium, his movements betraying his anxiety even from a distance. You sure you want to do this? Asked Diane, the program director, appearing beside me. You can still back out. I took a deep breath. I'm sure. It's time. This would be our first joint presentation, Michael and I together, sharing our story of family abuse and its aftermath from both perspectives. We'd each spoken separately to professional groups over the past months, but never together. The decision to combine our narratives had come gradually, through careful discussion and with the support of our respective therapists. You've both come a long way, Diane said, squeezing my shoulder gently. What you're doing today will help so many people understand the complexities of family trauma. I nodded, too nervous for words. Through the window, I could see Michael scanning the room, probably looking for me. Our agreement had been to meet 15 minutes before the presentation, but I'd arrived late intentionally, needing those extra moments to center myself. The past 6 months had been a careful dance of boundaries and revelations. Our monthly coffee meetings had evolved into occasional walks in the park, phone calls when one of us needed to process a particularly difficult therapy session, even one shared dinner at a restaurant halfway between our homes. I still hadn't invited him to my apartment, still kept certain aspects of my life private, but the wall between us had lowered significantly. Each conversation had revealed new layers of our shared past, connections I hadn't seen before, patterns of abuse more intricate than either of us had realized as children. Michael had finally told me about the punishment basement, a space I'd never known existed, where our father had taken him for specialized discipline reserved only for his son. I'd shared details about the psychological games our mother had played, turning me against potential allies through subtle manipulation and lies. Piece by piece, we'd reconstructed a more complete picture of the household that had shaped us both, each revelation bringing its own measure of pain but also clarity, and eventually, healing. Taking one final deep breath, I pushed open the door and entered the conference room. Michael's face lit up with relief when he saw me, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. I nodded reassuringly as I made my way to the front of the room. "Welcome, everyone," Diane began, addressing the assembled professionals. "Today's presentation is something special. Many of you have heard from either Sarah or Michael individually over the past months, sharing their experiences of childhood abuse from different perspectives. Today, for the first time, they'll be presenting together, offering a unique insight into how abuse impacts entire family systems, creating complex dynamics between siblings that can persist long after the abuse itself has ended." She turned to us with an encouraging smile. "Thank you both for your courage in sharing your story." Michael went first, as we'd planned. His voice shook slightly as he began, but steadied as he did. He spoke openly about his dual role, victim of our father's abuse, enabler of my suffering through his silence and complicity. He detailed the psychological manipulation that had pitted us against each other, the impossible choices presented to a terrified teenager, the long-term consequences of trauma and betrayal. "When my sister finally escaped," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "part of me was relieved. Not just for her, but selfishly for myself. Relieved that someone had finally broken the cycle, named the unnameable. But another part of me was terrified. With Sarah gone, all of my father's attention, all of his rage, focused solely on me." He paused, gathering himself. "I want to be clear. This doesn't excuse my failure to protect her. Nothing could. But it might help explain the complicated reality of family abuse, how it turns victims against each other as a survival mechanism." As I listened to his account, I was struck by how much he had grown in his understanding of what had happened to us, no longer minimizing or justifying, but taking full responsibility, while also contextualizing his actions within the system of abuse that had shaped us both. When my turn came, I approached the podium with steady steps. The faces looking back at me were attentive, some taking notes, others simply absorbing our story with professional concern. "My brother's betrayal," I began, my voice clear and strong, "was one of the most painful experiences of my life. For years, I defined myself in opposition to him. He was the coward. I was the brave one. He was the liar. I was the truth teller. It was a simple narrative that helped me make sense of a complicated trauma." I glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. "The reality, as I've come to understand it, is much more nuanced. We were both children in an impossible situation, making the best choices we could with the limited resources available to us. The true villain wasn't my brother. It was the abusive parents who created a system where children had to betray each other to survive." As I did my portion of the presentation, I shared not just the story of the abuse and my escape, but the more recent journey of tentative reconciliation, the difficult conversations, the boundaries established and respected, the slow rebuilding of trust. "The most important lesson I've learned," I concluded, "is that trauma isn't simple, and neither is healing. There's no perfect victim, no perfect survivor. We're all just doing our best to reclaim our lives from the people who tried to destroy them." The question and answer session that followed was intense but productive. The professionals asked thoughtful questions about the warning signs they should look for, how to approach children they suspected were being abused, how to understand the complex dynamics between siblings in abusive homes. One school counselor asked the question I'd been dreading: "Do you forgive your brother for his role in extending your abuse?" The room went quiet. Michael tensed beside me but remained silent, allowing me to answer honestly. "Forgiveness is complicated," I said after a thoughtful pause. "I understand now why he made the choices he did. I have compassion for the terrified teenager he was, and I value the relationship we're building now as adults who are both committed to healing. I met Michael's eyes briefly before continuing. But forgiveness isn't a single moment or decision. It's a process that unfolds differently for everyone. What matters more than forgiveness, I think, is that we're both free now. Free from the abuse, free from the silence that protected it, free to choose what kind of relationship we want to have moving forward. Michael's eyes shone with unshed tears, but he nodded in agreement. After the presentation ended and the attendees had filed out, expressing their gratitude and respect, Michael and I sat alone in the conference room, emotionally drained, but also strangely energized. That was harder than I expected, he admitted, loosening his tie. But also, I don't know, freeing somehow. Telling our story together, I agreed. It feels different than telling it separately. Do you regret it? He asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice. Doing this together? I considered the question carefully. No. It felt right. Like we're reclaiming the narrative, taking back control of our story. Relief washed over his features. That's how I felt too, like we're not letting them define us anymore. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of what we'd just shared settling around us. Sarah, Michael said finally, his voice hesitant. What you said about forgiveness, I want you to know I don't expect it. I never have. I'm just grateful for whatever relationship you're willing to have with me. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, seeing not the golden boy who had betrayed me, nor the broken man who had called me in tears 6 months ago, but the person he was becoming. Someone committed to truth, to healing, to making amends not just through words, but through actions. I think, I said slowly, that I'm closer to forgiveness than I ever thought I'd be. Not because you deserve it, necessarily, but because I deserve to let go of the anger. It served its purpose. It helped me survive, helped me maintain boundaries. But it's heavy, carrying it around all the time. Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever known. Not just for escaping, but for everything since. For building a life on your own terms, for being willing to revisit the past without being consumed by it, for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. We all deserve a chance to heal, I said simply. Even you. As we gathered our things to leave, Diane poked her head back into the room. You two were amazing. The feedback is already coming in. People are saying it's the most impactful presentation we've ever had. She beamed at us. Would you consider doing this again? Maybe for the conference in September? Michael looked at me, leaving the decision entirely in my hands. We'll think about it, I said. Let me get back to you. Outside, the spring air was warm and fragrant with blooming flowers. We walked to the parking lot in companionable silence, our shared experience creating a connection that didn't need words. I was thinking, Michael said as we reached my car. Mom's been asking to see you. Through her doctors, I mean, they say she's made progress in treatment, that she's beginning to acknowledge her role in enabling the abuse. I tensed. Our mother was the one family member I hadn't been ready to face. Unlike Michael, she had been an adult with choices, a parent with responsibilities she had utterly failed to fulfill. I'm not ready for that, I said firmly. Maybe someday, but not now. I understand, he said immediately, no pressure in his tone. I told them I'd pass along the message, but that it was entirely your decision. I appreciated his respect for my boundary, his willingness to accept my answer without argument. It was one of many small ways he demonstrated over the past months that he was committed to our new relationship on my terms. Thank you, I said, for understanding. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Baby steps, right? We've got time. As I drove home after our presentation, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, I'd answered a phone call from my estranged brother out of curiosity or perhaps a sense of unfinished business. I'd expected to confirm my long-held beliefs about his selfish betrayal, to reinforce the walls I'd built around my heart. Instead, I'd found something far more complicated, a fellow survivor whose choices I might never have made, but whose pain I could finally understand. The black and white narrative that had sustained me through 5 years of separation had given way to shades of gray, to the messy reality of trauma and its aftermath. I wasn't naive enough to believe our relationship would ever be simple or uncomplicated. The past couldn't be erased. The betrayal couldn't be undone. There would always be a before and after, a wound that had scarred over but never completely disappeared. But for the first time, I could imagine a future where that scar didn't define everything, where my brother and I could build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Not the false perfection our parents had demanded, but something authentic, something honest, something chosen rather than forced. When I reached home, I found a text waiting from Michael. "Thank you for today, for standing beside me, for telling our truth together. It means more than I can say." I typed back a response that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. "Same time next month for coffee? I was thinking maybe we could talk about that conference Diane mentioned. I think I might be ready if you are." His reply came instantly. "I'm ready whenever you are. One step at a time, right? One step at a time." It had become our mantra, our acknowledgement that healing, like betrayal, like trauma, like forgiveness, wasn't a single moment but a process, unfolding at its own pace, in its own time. There were no shortcuts, no perfect answers, only the daily choice to move forward, to speak truth, to choose connection over isolation when possible. I set my phone aside and turned to the stack of students' papers waiting for grading, my first semester as an adjunct professor teaching psychology, specializing in trauma and resilience. Another way I'd found to transform my experiences into something meaningful, something that might help others navigate their own paths to healing. My brother had betrayed me once, had chosen self-preservation over protecting me when we were both trapped in an impossible situation. That fact would always be part of our shared history. But it didn't have to be the end of our story. We were writing new chapters now, one difficult conversation, one boundary, one act of courage at a time. And for today, that was enough. 5 years to the day after I answered Michael's desperate phone call, we sat together on the patio of my new house, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and pink. My rescue dog, Luna, dozed at our feet, occasionally twitching in her sleep. The transition from apartment to house had been nerve-wracking, but ultimately empowering, another milestone in my journey toward feeling safe in the world. "I still can't believe you bought a place," Michael said, sipping his iced tea. "It's beautiful." "I can barely believe it myself," I admitted. Signing those mortgage papers was terrifying. Committing to staying in one place for so long? He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind my words. For years after escaping our parents' home, I'd lived in a state of readiness. Lease agreements never longer than a year, possessions kept minimal, an emergency bag always packed. The decision to buy a house represented more than a financial investment. It was a declaration of trust in my own stability, my own future. "You've come a long way," he observed quietly. "We both have." It was true. The past 5 years had transformed us both in ways neither of us could have predicted that rainy afternoon in the diner. Michael was sober now, 3 years clean after finally addressing the substance abuse issues he'd developed in the aftermath of our shared trauma. He'd completed a degree in social work and now specialized in helping young adults transitioning out of abusive homes. The golden boy our father had groomed as his successor had instead dedicated his life to dismantling the cycles of abuse our parents had perpetuated. Our monthly coffee meetings had evolved into regular family dinners, holiday celebrations, even occasional vacations together. The boundaries I'd initially established so firmly had softened over time, not because Michael had pushed against them, but because I'd felt safe enough to lower them gradually, on my own terms. "I got a call from the publisher yesterday," Michael said, changing the subject. "They want to move forward with the book, said our proposal was exactly what they've been looking for." I smiled, a mixture of excitement and apprehension stirring in my chest. The book had been my idea originally, a joint memoir about sibling relationships in abusive homes, about betrayal and reconciliation, about the complex journey toward healing. We'd spent the past year working on the proposal, debating how much to share, how to honor our own experiences while respecting each other's privacy. "That's great," I said. Scary, but great. We don't have to do it, he reminded me. If you're having second thoughts. No, I want to, I assured him. It's important. There are so many people out there like us, siblings separated by abuse, struggling to understand each other's choices, wondering if reconciliation is possible or even desirable. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of reconciliation, have you thought more about Mom's latest request? I sighed, setting down my glass. Our mother had been released from the psychiatric facility 3 years ago, moving into an assisted living center where she'd outpatient therapy. Her periodic request to see me had become a familiar tension point between Michael and me. Not because he pushed, but because I constantly questioned my own resistance. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should see her, if only for closure. Another part wonders what closure even looks like in this situation. You don't owe her anything, Michael said firmly. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not your presence. I know, but sometimes I wonder if I owe it to myself. To look her in the eye as the person I've become, not the terrified child she failed to protect. I stroked Luna's soft fur, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. What's she like now? Really? Michael considered the question carefully. Diminished, physically and mentally. The medications keep her stable, but she's not the same person. He hesitated. She expresses remorse, but I'm never sure how much is genuine insight versus what she thinks her therapists want to hear. Has she ever acknowledged what she did? Her role in it all? In fragments, she admits she knew Dad was too harsh with us, says she was afraid of him too, that she felt trapped. He shrugged. There's probably some truth to that, but it doesn't excuse her choices as an adult, as our mother. I nodded, having had similar thoughts. Our mother's potential victimhood complicated the narrative, but didn't erase her responsibility. She had been an adult with options, however limited they might have seemed to her at the time. I'll think about it, I said finally. Maybe after the book is finished. One emotional challenge at a time. Michael smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand briefly. No rush. Whatever you decide, I support you. The easy acceptance in his voice, the absence of pressure or judgment, was still sometimes surprising, a reminder of how far we'd come from the dysfunctional dynamics of our childhood. In our parents' house, every decision had been laden with manipulation, every choice weighted with potential consequences. Now we offered each other the freedom neither of us had experienced growing up. The freedom to choose, to set boundaries, to change our minds. I've been thinking about Dad too, I admitted. About what he would think of all this, you and me reconnecting, the work we're doing with abuse survivors, the book. He'd hate it, Michael said without hesitation. Everything we're doing dismantles the system he tried to create. The secrecy, the isolation, the control. We're exposing exactly what he spent his life hiding. I nodded, a strange satisfaction settling in my chest. That's what I thought too. There's something powerful about that, isn't there? Taking the worst thing he did to us and transforming it into something that might help others. Poetic justice, Michael agreed. We fell silent, watching as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon. Luna stirred at our feet, stretching before settling back into her comfortable position. In the distance, a neighbor's wind chimes tinkled softly, carried on the evening breeze. You know what today is, right? Michael asked after a while. 5 years since your call, I confirmed. I've been thinking about it all day. Me too. He turned to face me fully. I need to say something, and I hope it's okay. If it's too much, just tell me and we can change the subject. Curious, I nodded for him to. These past 5 years, getting to know you again, building this relationship on our terms instead of theirs, it's been the greatest gift of my life. His voice thickened with emotion. You had every right to hang up that phone, to keep that wall between us forever. The fact that you didn't, that you were willing to listen, to try, I don't take that for granted. Not for a single day. The sincerity in his words touched me deeply. I'm glad I answered, I said simply. Not just for your sake, but for mine too. I needed to understand what happened from both sides. I needed to see you as a whole person, not just the brother who betrayed me. Do you think... He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. Do you think you've forgiven me? It's okay if you haven't. I just wonder sometimes. It was a question we'd circled around but never addressed directly in 5 years of rebuilding our relationship. Forgiveness. That complex, nuanced process that looked different for every survivor. Had I forgiven my brother for his role in extending my suffering? For choosing self-preservation over protection when we were both caught in an impossible situation? I think, I said slowly, that forgiveness isn't the right word for what's happened between us. It suggests there was a debt that needed to be canceled, a ledger that needed balancing. What we've done is something different. We've come to understand each other's choices in context. We've built something new that acknowledges the past without being defined by it. Michael nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. It's not about wiping the slate clean. It's about seeing the whole picture clearly. Exactly. The betrayal happened. The pain was real. But so was your fear, your own victimization. So is the person you've become since. The work you've done to make amends not just with words, but with actions. I met his eyes directly. I don't think about forgiving you anymore. I just think about how grateful I am for the relationship we have now. One we've chosen, one we've built together with honesty and respect. Emotion passed over his features, too complex to name. Thank you, he said simply. For saying that, for everything. As darkness settled around us, I switched on the patio lights, casting a warm glow over our small gathering. Luna roused herself and padded over to the back door, her signal that she needed a trip to the yard before settling in for the night. I'll take her, Michael offered, standing up. You've been on your feet all day with the move. I watched as my brother and my dog ventured into the backyard together, their silhouettes visible against the porch light. 5 years ago, I would never have believed this scene possible. My brother in my home, trusted not just with my dog, but with my story, my truth, parts of my heart I'd locked away for protection. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks along the way, difficult conversations that left us both raw and exhausted, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, days when the weight of our shared past felt too heavy to bear. But we'd persisted, one step at a time, guided by therapists, supported by friends who understood trauma's complex legacy, committed to creating something healthier than what we'd inherited. As Michael returned with Luna, I was struck by how ordinary the moment felt, my brother and my dog coming back from a simple evening ritual, the comfortable silence between us, the absence of the tension that had defined our early interactions. There was a gentle domesticity to it, a normalcy that neither of us had experienced in our childhood home. What are you smiling about? Michael asked, settling back into his chair. Just thinking about how far we've come, I admitted. From that first phone call to sitting here on my patio, working on a book together, actually enjoying each other's company. It's not something I could have imagined 5 years ago. Me neither. I was just hoping you wouldn't hang up on me, to be honest. He laughed softly. I had this whole speech prepared, but it went out the window the moment I heard your voice. I almost did hang up, I confessed, several times during that first conversation. What stopped you? I considered the question, thinking back to that pivotal moment. Curiosity, maybe. Or some sense that there was more to the story than I'd allowed myself to consider. Or maybe just the fact that you sounded so... broken. So different from the golden boy I remembered. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I was broken. Had been for a long time, really. Dad's death just forced me to finally face it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the chirping of crickets providing a gentle soundtrack to our reflections. Luna curled up between our chairs, her presence a reminder of the new life I'd built, the safety I'd created for myself. So, Michael said eventually, book deadline in 6 months, decision about Mom afterward, and in the meantime? In the meantime, we keep doing what we're doing, I finished for him. One day at a time, one conversation at a time. I like that plan. He checked his watch reluctantly. I should get going. Early client meeting tomorrow. As we walked to the front door, I realized something important. The anxiety I'd once felt at having my brother in my personal space, knowing where I lived, being part of my daily life, had faded almost completely. In its place was a quiet comfort, a sense of having reclaimed something that had been taken from us both. The possibility of family as a source of support rather than fear. Same time next Sunday? Michael asked, pausing on the porch. Definitely. Bring those contract papers from the publisher if they come through. After he left, I locked the door and moved through my new home, checking windows and setting the alarm system, a routine born of old vigilance but now performed with calm rather than fear. Luna followed at my heels, her nails clicking softly on the hardwood floors. In my study, I paused before the corkboard where I'd pinned notes and outlines for our book project. At the center was a photograph taken at last year's Christmas gathering, Michael and me flanking Aunt Julia, all three of us smiling genuinely at the camera. It wasn't a perfect family portrait by conventional standards, but it represented something more meaningful. A family chosen and built with intention, with awareness of the past but not imprisoned by it. My brother had lied to CPS about our situation at home so our parents could keep hurting me. I had gone nuclear and never looked back. 5 years later, he had called me in tears, claiming I was the only family he had left. All of that was true, part of our shared history that couldn't be erased or denied. But it wasn't the whole story. The chapter that had begun with that phone call was still being written, page by page, conversation by conversation. Not a story of simple forgiveness or easy reconciliation, but something more nuanced and ultimately more human. A testament to the complexity of trauma, the possibility of growth, the power of truth spoken and heard after too many years of silence. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself looking forward to our next meeting, to the work we were creating together, to the relationship we need to build one step at a time. The betrayal that had once defined us had become just one chapter in a longer, more complicated story. Important, yes, but no longer the ending. We were writing new chapters now. And for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely curious to see how the story might unfold.